This is such a complicated question. How does trauma impact on your relationships? Well, let's find out how trauma impacted on my relationship. But first, please do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. This is a new channel. I really would appreciate your support. Hit the notification bell. And of course, if you enjoy the content, do give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment. Okay, so I guess I need to start at the beginning. Well, my parents were both alcoholics, and they had this nasty tendency of getting pissed and leaving their children anywhere because they'd forgotten us, basically. They left us behind while they went and continued their drinking. So we were taken into residential care. That first care home I was taken into was abusive, and it was later closed down for child abuse and neglect. I was addicted to Valium at the age of about 3. I had been repeatedly locked in a cupboard for long periods of time. That home was closed down. I was removed, and then I went into another children's home. Now, my father was quite a difficult character, so he decided his ultimate wisdom, very selfishly, that I wasn't to be adopted, but my brother could be. So he went in one direction and I went in the other. So I'm already experiencing a significant level of trauma through abandonment and abuse. But it didn't stop there. If it only stopped there, maybe my life would not have been so complicated. However, it continued. So let's continue. After that, I went into another children's home for quite a long period of time. I had numerous foster placement breakdowns, foster placement after foster placement, social worker after social worker. So there was never any consistency. We never celebrated birthdays and we never celebrated Christmases. The clothes that I used to wear were hand-me-downs. Well, they weren't hand-me-downs, actually. They were donated by members of the public into the children's homes. I was abused by another group of young people in that setting, in that children's home, and there were predatory staff in that children's home as well. Someone decided, I don't know who, but bad idea, whoever decided, that I should have the opportunity to be with a family. So I was adopted around the age of 13. Of course, that broke down because I was acting out, I was traumatized, they couldn't handle me. I was upsetting the other children in their family home. I ran away numerous times until eventually I managed to put myself back into an assessment centre where there was further abuse. It was like a war zone, that assessment centre. There were fights, the kids were out of control. I started self-harming. I tried to commit suicide. It was hard. Now, what happens when you're in residential care, in social services, is that at the age of 16, you get thrown out into the big wide world to learn independent skills. Yes, I know, 16, learning independent skills, already traumatized and damaged. It's not going to go well, is it? So the first supportive lodgings I went into, would you believe it? She locked the food cupboards, turned the heating off, was quite a nasty piece of work, was obviously in it for the money and didn't really give a shit about the people she had in her care. So I didn't stay there very long. I then went to another couple of placements, another couple of supportive lodgings that I found in the papers. And the next one I went into, the husband didn't like me being in the house. I can't actually remember why. I think it was something to do with his wife going out and partying when he didn't want her to. That was a bad influence again. So that didn't work out. And then I went to another place where I could rent a room, and that didn't work out. Can you see a pattern here? So I'm experiencing layer and layer of trauma, layer and layer and layer. But it didn't stop there, folks. It kept going, surprisingly enough. So what happened then was I moved into a flat in Birmingham, and unfortunately I was raped by the person who I was sharing a flat with and his friend. They came home late at night, shoved a pillow over my head and did what they needed to do. After that, I became homeless for a period of time. I then went into live at the YWCA, which was really a great thing. That was really the first place that I felt I had any stability. However, the job I had working as an assistant apprentice photographer in a unit was that one of the owners was taking advantage of me. So it wasn't a very pleasant situation. So trauma, layer. Let's get to the crux of the question. How does trauma impact on relationships? So given that level of trauma that I experienced, I found it incredibly difficult to establish friendships from an early age. So what would happen is I would make a connection with somebody, we'd become friends, but as soon as they got so close, I would cut off. I would just shut them out of my life completely because I couldn't cope with someone being that close to me. I didn't understand how to continue a relationship past a certain point. I think that was because I had been abandoned over and over and over again. I'd experienced rejection over and over again. It just never seemed to stop. So I would push people away. If they ever got too close, I would push people away when I was younger. Now, this had a really damaging consequence because I was incredibly lonely. I was very lonely. I felt isolated. I had no friends. So where I put my focus was on work. I put my focus on work because that paid the bills. It gave me a sense of containment that I could still interact with people, but I could interact with people safely because it would be at work. Then I'd go home, feel isolated and alone, have no social life, but I would go into work, so I would get my fix from work. But the truth is I struggled at work as well, always struggled at work. I was a loner at work. I was often hypersensitive. I was hypervigilant. So I was hypersensitive in the sense that I didn't feel that I fitted in. I felt that people were talking about me. I felt that I was being rejected. Of course, most of this stuff was probably going on in my head, for sure. It was a self-defense mechanism coming down. It's what I had learned from those years, unfortunately, of being institutionalized in the UK care system. So that trauma affected my teenage years significantly. Now, I'm also dyslexic as well, which is another nail in the freaking coffin, if I'm honest. And I experienced quite a bit of discrimination with different employers. So another way that the trauma impacted my relationships was my work relationships. I found it very difficult to manage conflict. I didn't know how to manage conflict. So I found myself constantly getting into fights around my dyslexia. I ended up taking a couple of organisations to court for disability discrimination, but I was always fighting my corner. And I sometimes wonder if I had learned how to deal with conflict, if I'd learned the skills needed to heal that trauma and to create healthy relationships, if those situations would have been different. It's an interesting question. I think it's an interesting question. And it's a question you start asking yourself when you start to realize how much trauma you've been through and how those repeated patterns seep into you project them into your future, and then they become their future. And of course, I have some level of responsibility in that. So that's one of those questions that comes up when you think, what was my part in that? Important question to ask. So I couldn't establish friendships. I struggled at work, always fighting my corner. And sexual relationships, it wasn't until I met my partner 21 years ago, Steve, who's an amazing man, by the way. You would love him. He is incredible. But for the first 7 years of our relationship, I was a nightmare. I tried everything I could to get rid of him, but he never left. He always said to me that he knew that trauma was part of my life, but it wasn't who I was. He never saw trauma, my traumatic experiences, the same way that I did. And to be honest, I was in trauma denial for such a long time that I didn't even know I was experiencing trauma. I didn't even know these events were traumatic, which is a bit insane. And it took me 40 years to realize how much trauma I had been through. So it's impacted my relationships 4 different ways. I haven't spoken about the 4th one yet, but it's affected my relationships, my friendships. I wasn't able to have them when I was growing up. It affected my relationships at work because I found it really difficult to be part of a member of a team. I would always self-isolate myself. I struggled with sexual relationships. And, the first 7 years of that relationship were really, really hard, tough, but we've been together 21 years now, so we got there in the end. And the 4th thing I haven't spoken about in terms of how does trauma impact relationships, and that is the toll and the impact trauma has. It's like a weight on your shoulder that weighs you down. So you see, for me personally, let's just talk about me. You see things around you negatively. I saw things in the shadows, whereas most people see things in the light. I would be focused in on the shadows, what's coming out the shadows, what's going to get me, hypersensitive, hypervigilant, always, always on the lookout. Now, the burden I was carrying of trauma, all those heavy emotions, because I hadn't dealt with them in my mind or my body, took its toll on my mental and emotional well-being. So I ended up with severe anxiety and eventually depression. Layer on layer on layer. If trauma isn't addressed, looked at, now what I'm not saying is that you go on head on into the trauma. That's not what I'm saying. What I do with my clients is we look at the symptoms and then we work backwards and lightly touch over from a helicopter view so they can understand what's created the behavior without going into the trauma. The last thing we want to do is re-traumatize ourselves. We've had enough shit as it is, let's face it. We don't want any more. So I wanted to share that with you. Remember to subscribe. I will be doing future videos. This is a brand new channel. It's all going to be about living your life trauma-free. Loads and loads of free content, loads of good stuff. If you've got any questions, pop them below in the chat box. That would be awesome. If you would like me to speak around something specifically related to trauma, do let me know. But trauma has affected my life significantly in terms of how it's impacted relationships significantly. I hope this has given some insight into the relationship trauma connection. That's my kittens running around, by the way. And if you're struggling with trauma and your relationships, do reach out. Do make sure that you either reach out to me or you get professional help from within your network, or you speak to a friend. But I always say first port of call should be your GP. nice, private, confidential. Hopefully you've got a good GP who isn't just going to necessarily prescribe meds. Meds have a time and place, which you'll need to talk through with your doctor. I'm not prescribing or not prescribing. Okay, gorgeous. Until next time. But welcome to the channel. This is the first video on the channel, and I thought this would be a good one to talk about how trauma has impacted my relationships.